topic of this today was about turf, and I'm going to make a little bit of a twist on this. I'm not going to talk much about remediation of things like fungi, and all sorts of pests. But I want to talk about gardening in general as it relates to ecology and what we can do in our community. But I'll touch on these other items as well. So you can see this yard. Jim and I were talking earlier about yards, and a lot of people in this world today were raised with this type of yard. They wanted a perfect golf course, like you mentioned, fairway yard. And now as we experience climate change and all the ecological changes we have, environmental changes that we have, we're starting to see that that's maybe not a good idea anymore. Matter of fact, if you go to Las Vegas, they're pulling up all the turf, not all, a large part of the turf, because of what? What would you guess? Water conservation. They're having water's a valuable resource in the West with Colorado River and all the issues with that and the warming of that water. I have two, well, I don't know how that got off there like that. But it's supposed to say life is like a credit card. It's a lot of fun until you get the bill. I believe that procrastination is what really stops us from accomplishing things. And what also stops us from accomplishing things is making the task much bigger than it appears that it needs to be. By the inch it's a cinch, by the yard it's harder. I really believe that if you break things up in small segments, get your information, and don't stress to get things done more quickly than you probably need to, usually things will get done, right? So a couple fun facts. The yards per se, as we know, manicured yards started in England in about the 1700s, in England and France. The roots is in the word vade, which is a grassy woodland clearing that they had back then. And we didn't really see much at all of that in the United States until Thomas Jefferson at Monticello in 1806. And he started establishing that and having lawns and manicured properties. Generally, at that time, early American yards were continued to be used for agrarian purposes, stock yard, all those different named yards. It was because that's what they used it for. Eventually, that evolved to yards. And post-World War II, we had this big splurge in housing and suburbanization of the cities, where they had these huge tracts of home that were built, and yards started to be something that was much more prevalent. People were using them because they had a small tract of land that was easy to take care of. When you talk, this is perfect for Jim because he's trying to figure out what to do with his yard. When you start, I'd like to start with questions. Why do you want to establish a lawn at your home? People have all sorts of reasons for recreation, for floral gardens, and they have all different sorts of reasons for it. And what kind of yard do you want? Jim had a pretty good idea of what he wanted, but you have to consider those things because there's all sorts of variables that we'll talk about. And then lastly, what kind of yard do you have? Be honest, right? Some people have a yard that's not very well developed, it's not thriving, and so we're going to talk about that. So we have to think about this a little bit. That's me when I was younger, by the way. So we have to think about that a little bit. And you can see some examples of yards. This on the bottom right is kind of a Midwestern prairie type scenario. On the left would be kind of a desert scenario where you could have desert plants and drought-resistant plants. Up on the top left is what you see in golf courses, and lots of homes have it. I have a nice front yard. I'm in the process of changing it to a different type of yard. And then you have people that just don't care, and that's okay, I have a lot of those in my neighborhood too. So what can a lawn do for you? The most obvious thing is beauty. Not so obvious is soil retention. As master gardeners, we constantly preach and preach and preach when we're working in landscape gardens or vegetable gardens that you don't take the soil off your property. If you pull a weed, shake the dirt out, keep the dirt on the properties. Soil takes a long time to create, right? Weed suppression, you can keep the weeds down. And when you keep the weeds down, what else happens? Down there at the very bottom, almost the bottom, you get fewer insects, fewer bugs, fewer nesting places. Also, it provides organic material for the ground. We'll talk about that a little more. It provides a habitat for all sorts of useful insects, some caterpillars and different things that live in the ground. And really important, it helps rain absorption. You've been in construction, and everybody knows about impervious surfaces. You've ever heard that term? You know, they have a regulations to how much you can put a driveway on an acre or hard surfaces. Why is that? Because they want to control the amount of water that goes into the sewer, into the stormwater, and stays in your yard, gets absorbed. And fewer bugs, and the other thing is safer. I've seen yards where if you walk across it, you probably get a broken ankle or step in on a sprinkler head that was covered with a weed. So it's just very, very important. So I'm going to give you a little test. Okay? Imagine this is your yard. Okay? And what I'd like you to do is look at this yard and tell me what you see. If you had to tell me what's wrong with this yard, what are the most pressing problems, what would they be?
I would say that looks like it's 90% just almost bare ground, right? Weeds.
Okay.
Very little grass, so 80-90% just.
Exactly, that's what I'd see. What else would you see when you look at it?
Runoff from that gutter is causing a,
Yeah,
ditch.
got stormwater issues that you're gonna have to think about when you develop a yard. What else can you see? What's the color? Go ahead.
Kind of a gully-like area there that probably collects water, and you're gonna get mosquitoes and.
Yeah, it's very good. It needs to be graded probably, right? It's an uneven surface, it needs to be leveled. It's gonna cause erosion in places, standing water in others. What else can you see?
There's nothing between the foundation of the house and the yard itself that would keep the water flowing away from the foundation of the house.
It's hard to see here, but it looks like there's actually a positive slope away from the house. But that's probably the biggest problem we have in Tennessee is people building with a negative slope coming back to the house. So what else? What's the color of this ground indicate?
Clay.
Clay. It's clay.
No topsoil.
And when if you know construction, when they built this house, they probably did something called a cut, where they cut it, took all the topsoil away, and it's down to hard, dead pan, or not dead pan, but hard pan soil. So here's the things I came up with. I said it's sloping, which we talked about. Stormwater runoff is an issue. We have a red clay, which is pretty common here. We have weeds. How about full sun? It's probably going to be a full sun yard, right? Unless there's some trees over there we can't see. There's rocks in there. The surface is not consistent with what Jim said. There's no topsoil. And most likely that was a cut, and there's pests. So those are the challenges, okay? So now what I want you to do, all 15 of you, what I want you to do is I want you to think about your yard. If you were to walk through your yard, walk through let's just say the front yard, start, what are the things in your mind's eye that you can see that are problems for you? Any of these things are problems? It's shade, trees that overhang the property that create problems. There's all sorts of things you need to look at. You need to look at where you want your beds to be, where your kids are going to play, where you have circulation problems. All those things need to be considered. And the best way to do that is to make a hand drawing of your front yard, in this example, and start going through and planning it out. Don't just start putting it in, plan it out. And it all starts with soil, right? That looks like Illinois and St. Paul, Minnesota soil. I found this, and I thought this was really quite good. There's a gentleman, Aldo Leopold, in 1949, that said this, and he was kind of a front runner and a scientist in terms of soil. He said, land then is not merely soil; it is a fountain of energy flowing through the circuits of soils, plants, and animals. Food chains are the living channels which conduct energy upward. Right? Death and decay return it to the soil. The circuit is not closed. Some energy is dissipated in decay. Some is added by absorption from the air. Some is stored in soils, peats, and long-lived forests. But it is a sustained circuit, like a slowly augmented revolving fund of life. And I think if there was a mind shift we need in our culture, in our country right now, is that we start treating this culture with respect. We don't spray chemicals on it that destroy this critical bacteria that helps with decomposition of materials, that doesn't kill bugs that are critical to the process. You can see here that it's a circle. The things up above are operating, coexisting, doing what they do. They die, and those dead organisms are bring into the soil. At the same time, you're getting oxygen and carbon coming from the air, and they're creating that thing we need to create our micronutrients and our nutrients. That everybody talks about buying tomatoes in the store, how they don't taste the same. It's because they don't have a lot of those same nutrients that we get when we garden ourselves, organically especially. Any questions at this point? Soil compaction. We talked about this with Jim a little bit, but what soil porosity is what we want. Soil compaction limits water absorption. Everybody knows that around here that's lived here that clay has got tons of nutrients in it. You just can't get to them because it's so compacted. Okay? It limits root growth. It leads to unhealthy plants. And non-porous soil does not facilitate microbial action. So what happens when you have compacted soil? You can see here on the left is a compacted soil example. When you look at the top, what do you see? Water and air can't get into the soil and be absorbed. So when we don't get water and air getting into the soil, we lose carbon, right? Carbon is essential to that process. You look at, and you can see down here, the nutrients that would go into the plant are leached down into the soil, and we don't thrive.
Is that the reason for aerating?
Yes, very good. I'm coming to that next, okay? So you look on the right side, and you can see a healthy plant. You look up at the top, you see water and air are going into the plant. You can see the soils are friable. It's crumbled. It can be crumbled, you know, as opposed to when you hit it, it's a rock. Okay, and you can see through that structure, you get through that because of that process. You're getting good nutrients, and the plant is thriving. Absorption is good. Bacterial and microbial activity is good. Talk about aeration, very appropriate. So how do you fix the problem? There's all sorts of ways. For the typical yard, it would be to use is first is to start with aeration. Everybody understand what an aerator does? Aerator takes a plug out of the ground, deposits it on the ground, and allows makes room for the soil to expand. But it doesn't do it by itself. It requires top treating or top dressings. So when you imagine you've got a section this big, and there's 10 by 10, and it's got 100 holes or 500 holes in it, you would come across here with this top dressing, which is usually a compost, and you spread it over that. It fills those holes, and over time, if you do that on an annual basis, over time, the soil gets better and better and better. And it also facilitates new seed. When the seed hits the hole, it's got a fertile and proper environment for seed to propagate. And it does things too, like leveling the yard, and making where the yard is safe. And so by leveling the yard, you also prevents pooling and ponding of water in your yard. A lot of the fungus that we get here in Tennessee, that is because of pooling of water, and there's not enough airflow and circulation to get rid of that water, so you end up getting fungus, and you get things that are detriment to the soil. Any questions about this? Now this is a manual one, the one I showed you previously. You can get an aerator that you can get at the Home Depot or rent that will do the job for you and do it well. Or you can have somebody professionally come and do it. But what I see happening with so many people that are aerating yards, they aerate, but they don't do anything else with it. They just let it, it doesn't serve the purpose. And it's going to cost you some money for the amendment, for the compost. But, yeah.
So you aerate it first, then you put topsoil or compost?
Correct. The question was, do you aerate it first, then what you do? Do you aerate it, put topsoil, compost, or other organic material you might have? Might be composted manure, could be horse or cow manure. It makes a huge difference. And then, after that's done, in the appropriate time of the year, you'd seed, and it's got which is usually the fall here. And that helps you with your growth, and it helps you with your grass density too. If you ever notice when you see one of those plugs, the grass seed through there, it's really dense coming out of that plug. So imagine you do that over 3 years, what a difference it would make in your yard. And I'm not just talking about appearance, I'm talking about organic activity and bacteria and all the things that happen in the soil. So what I'm trying to say to you is $10, you have a $10 hole for a $5 plant. I mean, you've got to spend more money than you think, but the benefit's there because the plant's going to live. Your garden is going to thrive. So that leads to something we talk about all the time in organic master gardeners, is soil testing. And you know what that is, Debbie, right? If you had yours tested?
Yes.
You get your soil testing, and Jim and I were talking about this, you can determine, number one, just what you have. What's the pH, which is the most common thing that we look at. And you can, when you look at the study I handed out to Jim, you can look and see there's all sorts of other tests. You can test for heavy metals, you can test for the CEC exchange rate, you can all different things you can do. But the basic soil test will tell you that you have, if you have a pH problem. And this is the information if you want to look for it and get this test done. pH, as you know, is a scale of 1 to 14. 5.5 to 7 is considered neutral. You ideally want around 6 to 7. 5 is getting a little lower, but that would help with things like potatoes or some types of ferns. And I'm not a ornamental guy, but that's where a lot of those plants fall. And that's very, very important. And the pH changes with a lot of different, through rain, temperature, that pH can go up and down. Mine, when I had mine tested, was at 6.9. So it was really good. Any questions about that? But all plants need these things, including grass. We need space to grow. And what does that mean? Sounds obvious, but what does that mean?
Not crowded.
She said not crowded.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the ground that the grass is growing is not crowded.
Don't
And what
try
do
to
you-
grow a patch of grass when you're surrounded by cement.
Yes, yes.
Something like that.
But I'm being kind of sneaky that this first one stays to grow is within the soil itself. The porosity that we talked about, the fact that you have to have room for those roots to move. Space, as it relates to other plants in landscaping, is you have to have enough big enough place for the plants to grow. You see it all the time where they have a bush 3 feet apart, and they have a 6-foot span on the bushes. They're going to overlap and they're not going to thrive. Light is very, very important. As you walk, I've talked about in your mind's eye, you walk around your yard and you try to imagine what you're missing and what you need. Well, if a big bush is shading your grass, it's going to get the light it needs. Is a tree shading your grass? Is it going to get the light it needs? And not just the drip line of the tree, but beyond the drip line, because the tree has a root system that extends far beyond the drip line. So grass will always compete with trees, and trees will compete with grass for water. Nutrition, we talked about that a little bit. Get that soil with the macronutrients that we need so that the plants can grow. We can do that artificially, or we can do it in an organic method. We'll talk about that. And last but not least, water. 1 inch of water per week for most climates, most temperatures. If you get into extremely warm weather like we have here sometimes, when you get up in the 90s, you want to maybe water 1.5 inches per week. And that brings me to another thing that's important, is if you're going to know how much water you have, what do you need to do?
Measure.
Rain gauge.
Yeah. You can get a $3 rain gauge you put in your garden, and you can know unequivocally how much rain you've gotten. It's just very, very important. Let's see. Okay, any questions about this? This is pretty basic, but this is stuff that people do not remember. When you're planting your yard, it's important. Jim, question?
Yeah, so 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. Okay, so if your rain gauge is empty for a full week, okay, then at that point you want to go out and start really, really watering, or, I mean, should you be doing it?
Yeah, that's a good start. I mean, if your starting point
I
will
don't know where I'm
change.
going with that, but.
No, Jim's asked what do you do when you have a rain gauge? If you come out and it's empty, is that when you need to water? There's signs. You can look at the way your grass looks and determine that it needs it. But generally, 1 inch, you just go ahead and apply water right then.
So how do you determine that you've watered 1 inch when it's just coming out of your hose?
So when you're watering 1 inch, you make yourself a rain gauge that goes in the yard itself where you're watering. It collects when you water, and you can see pretty accurately how much you're going to have. Could be a pie pan, something big enough to catch a surface area, like a pie pan or something like and just have an inch marker on it. You'll come to know after you've watered for a while how long it takes to have an inch. You know, your water pressure is fairly constant usually, so you can double check it with having a pan in the yard. So the bottom line is that grass needs sunlight. Most grasses, with a few exceptions, do well in full sun. And some varieties have some tolerance, but most, it's kind of silly when I say that, an evergreen magnolia is so dense you'd never get grass to grow in it. The creeping red fescue is one of the best ones that we have in this area for shade. It's a variety you can get at Mayo's and different stores. Knoxville seed, by the way, over off of Rutledge Pike is a great place to go. It's not far from you. So once again, plants need a place, light, air, nutrition, and water. And how much do you water? We talked about that. The water, what's important when you're watering to your question, it's better for you to water 1 time an inch than to water 5 times an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch. Because what happens when the water hits the ground, if you're only watering a quarter of an inch, the absorption, it only goes about that far down in the ground. If you water for an inch, you're probably going to get 4 to 6 inches of absorption, and what's that going to reach?
Make the roots go down.
It's going to make the roots go down. If not, the roots actually move out to the side to reach the water, and you're not getting the type of plant that you want.
So you're talking about watering with a sprinkler?
The sprinkler or whatever you got, irrigation,
Yeah.
it's better to water once a week and water deeply than to water periodically. And we even see this with vegetables and potted plants. You don't want to just throw a little water on the surface of the pot. You want it to go down so the roots will go down and seek that water. When you mow, you have to mow. Well, you don't have to, but when you do, depends on what kind of grass, how high you cut it. Generally with the cool weather, the Kentucky 31 and those cool weather tall fescues, that is about 3.5 inches is where you want to cut. People scalp their yards, and it compromises the plant's ability to absorb water by doing so. And it exposes this top of the soil to more sunlight and drying out than what needs to be. And most importantly, it exposes them to seeds, weed seeds. And pests have a place can see the ground more accurately. If you have a warm weather grass, like a centipede grass, or Georgia, or Bermuda, or one of those grasses, that's usually 2 to 2.5 inches high, and they don't need near as much water. The other thing that's important is to have a mulching mower so that the clippings are mulched, are broken up into pieces and go into under the surface of the grass. And when you do that aeration, you benefit from that because that will work its way into those spaces. And then the other thing that people don't do is changing directions when you mow. If you worked hard to get rid of compaction in your yard, you should switch the patterns you use when you mow. Because it's like I have a lawn tractor. I'm old and lazy. So when I'm on my tractor, I'm going along there and I'm making definitive marks on the ground, so I alter it. And that's another reason why aeration is good, because before you enter into the next season, you had aeration, you've helped with that compaction that you gained through mowing your yard. Question, Jim?
So yeah, I was just going to ask, so it sounds like you maybe do what I do. I try to mow in straight lines and right angles.
Right.
Is that what?
You
But then what I'll do is, last week I did it one way, this week I'll do it a different way.
Right.
Next, I'll kind of mix up the checkerboard.
Okay, yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. Jim is saying that they basically, when he mows, he changes directions and mows in straight lines and right angles.
Mm-hmm.
But the key is try not to go over the same place every time you mow. Sometimes it's hard, and that's why aeration is important.
Is this the right time of year to do the aeration?
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't do it till the fall. I'd say in this marketplace, with this market, I'd say September for aeration. Seeding in late September is the ideal time. And the other thing, do not park on the grass. People, I live in a fairly nice subdivision, and people have 3 cars on the grass. That's not good. And as a matter of fact, if you want an example of compaction, when
But the driveway's always empty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but when you see construction, when you have a truck, like a big truck come up in your yard, their biggest concern is they will compact the ground to the point where they'll break a sewer line or a water line, heavy trucks. So it's a real thing, compaction's a real thing. So I mentioned earlier to Jim and I talked quite a bit, but we live in a transition zone. We're really not a warm season grass location. We're also not a cool season grass location. And our planting zone is now 7B. We've changed. We've gotten warmer in the last 2 years. So it's a bit of a gamble, what you plant, how you plant. And keep that in mind. So, in summary, I guess, is that healthy lawn solves many problems, has fewer weeds, fewer diseases, requires less chemicals, does require work, and most of all, looks great when you do it. So when you don't do it, and you don't do the things right, you get weeds. And I always like to think of weeds as nature's Band-Aid, that it takes earth and it puts it over that's its way of covering up bare ground so it doesn't lose it to the world. And there are so many types of weeds. If you go online, if there actually is a reference page here, if you go online, you'll see weeds of 50 varieties that you can deal with if that's what you choose to do. The one I have most of is the purple dead nettle, and Johnson grass and crabgrass. There are pre-emergent herbicides, post-emergent herbicides, but most important, when you're looking at these different chemicals, that you read the labels very, very carefully and you apply exactly as they indicate. Technically, you're in violation of federal law when you don't. And that's because it impacts water, it impacts a lot of different things. But in Tennessee, the initial pre-emergence is in April, and that would take care of things like crabgrass and some of the winter weeds. The next one, sequential application would be pre-emergence, would be in April, late April, early May, which once again addresses crabgrass and some of the other ones. And then you get into germination, goosegrass germination, and you can do post-emergent applications if you choose to. I have a little thing, if I do spray, I go out and have a little hand spray, I spray spots. Or, God forbid, I take my little shovel and I dig them out, which is the preferable method. If you do it right, and you consistently do it, that will become grass and you can eliminate things like Johnson grass. Johnson grass will not be killed by these chemicals. The only chemical that really works is Roundup, a form of Roundup. In Tennessee, we have fungal diseases, brown patch, dollar spot, powdery mildew, red thread, fairy rings, and they can do damage to your yard. But these two things are caused primarily because of excess humidity and poor air circulation or standing water. And I talk about that. High humidity, shade, large amounts if they fertilize it wrong, nitrogen. Yeah.
So when you have the mildew, and you said it's because of the moisture, you should probably water at a different time so your lawn can air out?
That's a very good, one thing I forgot to mention, when you want to water in the morning.
Okay.
Do not, when you water at night, you're basically giving these things an open door invitation to come in and visit your yard. Okay?
So you don't cut the grass lower, you just make sure the water is absorbed one way or the other
Right.
through the course of the day.
Right. So you just water early in the day, set your timer, from your experience, you watch your gauge, water till it's done, and then if you have proper air circulation, you don't have excessive amounts of shade, there's a lot of factors, then you're going to be a lot safer. Now, one other thing you can do is you can actually go out there with a broom and knock the mildew off your grass in the morning too if you want to. If you have a small yard, it's very doable. So we're not going to go over these, but this will be accessible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about something that's very, very important. It's kind of a solution to your problems. We have a program in the state of Tennessee. It's called Tennessee Smart Yards. And it's all about creating a sustainable landscape. Why do we want to have a sustainable landscape? We want to preserve our soil. We want to preserve our water. We want to make sure that we don't have these excessive chemicals. And it benefits the local environment for people and et cetera. I don't know why that's ran off there. It didn't run off in my slide. But if you go to this TennesseeYards.udk.edu, you can access this. And this is actually a certification process. And this is where you put your thinking cap on and you ask yourself, what do I want my yard to look like? Well, you can see from these pictures, you can take any number of appearances. You can have wet gardens, you can have flower beds, you can have clover yards. You can do all sorts of things that will benefit you in terms of your amount of work that goes into it, the less use of chemicals at all, and you could switch to being totally organic and it's very, very, very possible and feasible. Any of these that you can look at here. I mean, it's all over the map. In the process, when you go on the site, they'll give you a certification process that will ask you about certain things. How do you water your yard? How do you take care of your yard in terms of pesticides and herbicides? Is your soil accessible? Do you have a lot of impervious surfaces, like driveways and things that you might be able to reduce runoff into the sewer, into a stormwater? There's all sorts of different things. I'm in the process of doing it myself. I've been replacing my yard with native plants, buckeyes, asters, button bushes. Finally starting to see some stuff come around. But you can see these things are all achievable through this certification. You get improved property value because you have a yard that looks good. You have reducing long-term maintenance costs because the soil is good. You're not having to go out and buy fertilizer and pesticides and herbicides. It's sustainable. You can do it year after year to just continue practices. It's part of being a solution to the ecological crisis, protecting community health and environment, nurturing nature and wildlife, and passing on a healthier landscape to the next generation. You're from up in the Minnesota area, the Mississippi River. If you look at what's happening down in Florida where it deposits all these herbicides and pesticides from all these farms, it's creating all sorts of problems. And for the manatees, it's destroying their food, it's polluting their water, it's polluting the ocean water and all the tributary streams. It's a real evil. It's a very big problem. If you look at these resources, they're pretty simple, but if you look at insect control, there's 2 publications that the University of Tennessee does. You go to utk.edu website, and you can get information just about anything. You get on Tennessee smart yards, the different grasses, and it's all there for your use.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
If you have problems like the mildew or like some of the pictures that you have, who do we call if we can't figure it out ourselves?
On the other handout I gave you, maybe I didn't.
No, I gave
Oh, you
it to
did.
you, yeah.
The other handout that you have has got all sorts of context on the back and on the front. We have a thing called Ask a Master Gardener, and you can go on that and contact them by email or by phone. They're not going to respond to you immediately, but it might be within 24 hours.
Is this something you need back today then?
No, that's yours. So you can go to those different resources, and if you have a question about fungus, you have pesticides, fertilizers, soil testing, you can go also ask them, like I said, ask them, or you can call the extension. The extension number's here. And if you have a particular problem, right down at the bottom of that page. This topic is a very broad topic. I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about just soil structure, which is fascinating. Your dad was a chemist, you said. But we're just trying to give you an overview that when you're doing your planning for your yard, look at Tennessee Smart Yards, and they'll come out and talk with you and answer questions for you. It's a very viable program, a way to help with our environment and help you have a great yard. Did you have a question, Denny?
So I've been in my home yard for over 20 years. About 10 years ago, I quit using any fertilizer on the lawn because I have dogs.
Okay.
And my yard is just awful looking. I have all sorts of weeds in it now that I didn't used to have.
Right.
But I feel like it's a healthier for the animals.
Right. There are organic solutions to that. That's a whole nother discussion. I'll be glad to send you a list of them. But there's organic solutions you can use for pest control, weed control. And that, by the way, this is something I also forgot to mention, is make sure if you have dogs, clean up their mess in the yard, because it's very detrimental to the yard, but it also carries a lot of diseases and things that kids can pick up.
What about like urine spots?
Huh?
What about like the dog's urine spots that
I mean, you
you
just
just
have
got to deal with them?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have dogs?
I have one dog.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm addressing most is fecal matter. And that's, not to mention the unpleasant. Yeah, go ahead.
So, tell me what you think of these programs that you can get where Scott's will, you fill out a questionnaire and they will send you the product you need at the time they say you need it.
Well, if you do your soil report, it'll tell you the same thing. You can get soil report done, and then you just look at, and then it's just a matter of calculating what you need for your area. But once again, remember, they're there to sell you chemicals.
Yeah.
And if you have in terms of starting a yard, and even our esteemed companion Marcia would tell you that sometimes you have to do a quick fix. You might want to start the yard initially with commercially created chemicals, but then as you get further and further into your yard, you can do impartial fertilizers where you only add certain things besides nitrogen. You can come back and add phosphorus, you can add potassium. I would recommend consulting with somebody within our organization, Ask a Master Gardeners, and they can give you solutions. But as a starting point, you can do it and get it started.
I just like the idea of the stuff showing up at my door.
Yeah.
Because then I know, okay, I don't have to go back and reread what it is I need to do. It's just,
Right.
oh, they sent me this, it's time to put it on.
Scott
Yeah.
used to publish a little brochure, and it had the seasons and the months listed in the seasons, and told you exactly what you needed to do for this particular area. I don't know if they still have that available or not.
By the way, Jim asked the question, what about these programs where you can go to Scott's and these manufacturers and give them your yard dimensions, and they send you the appropriate amount of material to treat your yard. I guess if I were going to say that, I'd rather have you have a commercial, a residential land care company come in and spray it. That would be more preferable to me as a starting point. Plus, when you start looking at the cost of your materials for those initial things, and people will shoot me if they, I'm not advocating for it, but it's cheaper to have somebody do it than it is to buy it.
Okay. I've wondered that myself.
Yeah, I've done the calculations, it's cheaper. But it's a progression. You start with it, and then you continue to build in your understanding of the environment of your ecology, and talk to people. People in our group love to talk about what we do and what's the best practices. Our commission as an organization is to teach people using best practices and to create a sustainable environment.
And Roger, just to add to that, even if you did get somebody to do your yard, don't you need to be like an informed buyer as far as you probably need to have the soil test, because the company will try to sell you, a ton of lime or something, I think something that you really don't need, even though that's the pat answer. Well, let's just throw something on it. So you can make sure that what they're saying is something good and not they're just trying to sell you something. So I still think a soil test, and so you can be an educated consumer.
Yeah,
Even if you have somebody do the labor for you.
I had my yard started initially with a commercial company, and I had my soil test, and I told them what it was. And my company I like it because they give me in-depth explanations of everything they put down and how often they do it and what it does to your grass. But I'm not planning on using them more than another season. I might use them one more season, and then I'm done. But were they able to hear what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
What
And
about pest control, mosquitoes in particular?
I don't know enough about that to speak on it. I know that
I'm trying to keep all the standing water, removed, but
keeping your grass cut to the right height, eliminating big patches of weeds where they can have a habitat, standing water. We've not seen my house, but I have a fairly big backyard, and I don't have a mosquito problem. But I'm pretty careful about what I do and how I do it. Now, even with this wet weather, and that's why it's important to consider your grade of your property, positive flow away from your house, that you don't, that the water doesn't sit on the grass forever.
So is
You know,
drain tile a good?
Drain tile.
A good idea first?
Yeah, and I have so there's all sorts of methods. I have my water, I have a 600-gallon tank underneath my deck that I collect rooftop water. So, yeah, it's a problem, and it just takes time and persistence. Mosquitoes are kind of dangerous now with West Nile virus.
What's the best way to, basically just fill holes in your yard? Just compact it down topsoil? I mean, I have places that they can be this deep.
Yeah, what I would do there, you asked what's the method by which you could fill holes in your yard? What I do is when I have a hole that's happened, because they come out of nowhere too.
Yeah.
And what I do is I put soil on it, I heap it up so it's 2 inches taller than what the hole, than this even surface of the yard is, and I let it sit, I don't compact it. And then once it drops down, if it continues to drop, I'll add a little bit more soil. And then once I get where it's on grass level, then I'll seed it. You don't want to come in and start stomping on it, because you're going to get that anyways through your mowing and stuff, but that's the best method.
So topsoil. That could get pricey at $3 a bag too.
Yeah, and not all topsoil coming from the big box stores is good topsoil. It's just one of the problems we have where we live today, that stuff isn't accessible. I can provide you with the name of a company that brought me my topsoil. And I ordered 22 cubic yards and distributed it myself by hand. But I was not very bright. Any other questions?
I could ask questions of David.
Well, you're certainly welcome to call to ask him, Mr. Gardner.
So will this be available?
It will be, it will be.
Yeah.
Great.
And this was really general, but I'd really like you to take time and read these websites with the Smart Yards. And there's going to be a Smart Yards Festival in Knoxville that we do in September. It's going to be at the UT Gardens. Have you been to the UT Gardens?
Yeah.
It's a great place to go for, and have you been to Knoxville Arboretum?
I don't think the.
That's over off of Magnolia. It's a beautiful place.
Yes, yes.
Well, Roger,
Thank you for coming.